Hi everybody, welcome to my pre-recorded presentation for IMA 2020. My topic today will be plastic twinning in nickel titanium, in particular nickel titanium B19 prime martensite. And besides my collaborators from Prague, I would like to acknowledge mainly Tomonari Inamura from Tokyo, Japan, who discussed this topic with me a lot, and also, of course, Hussein Tahitoglu for giving me the opportunity to speak in this session. So before we go to the presentation itself, I have to spend a few minutes on the title because it reads the 2O-1 interfaces in plastically from the martensite. Are they twins or are they kwinks? And you may be wondering what a kwink is. So I think everyone here in this session knows what the twin is. Twin is a planar defect joining two exactly the same but differently oriented parts of the crystal, and it is created by simple shearing. This defect is the main deformation mechanism in sheet memory alloys, and it works as outlined here. But then there is a very similar defect called kink, and it appears in layered media in long period stacking order magnesium alloys and such materials. And this is again a planar interface between two differently oriented lattices, but in this case, the lattices are related not by mirror reflection or by shear, but they are related by rotation. And in the kinking, the interface provides this rotation by presence of a dislocation pileup. It's like in a low angle grain boundary. The difference that here the angles can be pretty large. And it is quite intuitive that these two defects, the twin and the kwink, can be merged into one defect where we are having two lattices which are twin related, plus we add some rotation by adding dislocation scores along the twin interface. And by merging the words twin and kink, we decided to call this planar defect a kwink. So in my presentation, I will discuss the possibility whether the 2O-1 interfaces, so-called plastic twins in nickel titanium martensite, are in fact twins or kwinks. And I will use different tools like discussing the orientation relationships between the lattices over this interface, and also I will do my beloved continuum mechanics to read the main result. So the 2O-1 interfaces are observed in plastically deformed B19 prime martensite. They are called plastic twins, which means that they cannot be erased by heating the material up to austenite. And an additional specific feature of these twins is that they are nearly always observed in form of very specific patterns, as you can see here on this nice figure from this paper from 2006. Once you go beyond the rotation plateau for B19 prime martensite, your stress starts reaching and you start observing these zigzag wedgie patterns composed of 1O twins and 2O-1 twins in martensite. And the nice thing is that these patterns and these twins are pretty universal. This was observed on a large grained polycrystal, but we can see exactly the same behavior and exactly the same patterning, even if we use a cold work wire with 10 times smaller grain size. So it seems like the pattern formation is somehow closely related to the existence of the 2O-1 interfaces themselves. And these patterns are quite unique. They are not observed in any other sheet memory alloy. For all other sheet memory alloys, we observe mostly laminations or other type of wedgie patterns, diamonds, parallelograms, and so on. But these zigzag patterns are not seen in any other sheet memory alloy than in nickel titanium martensite, with the only exception being the nickel titanium austenite. But it's not surprising, because I said that these twins are plastic twins. They do not disappear when heated up to austenite. In fact, they transform into 4, 1, -1 twins in the B2 lattice of austenite. So this pattern is somehow transferred from martensite to austenite. Of course, it's not one-to-one correspondence because this pattern includes the 100 interfaces that somehow disappear and they are replaced by some different plastic twins in martensite, but still the pattern itself is somehow preserved over the transition. On the other hand, exactly these patterns are observed in the materials prone to kinking. So I have here a very nice image from Wadi's paper on deforming a layered medium. In fact, it was a pile of papers, and you can see that in a layered medium, you can observe exactly the same zigzag wedge patterns as here in nickel titanium, austenite, or martensite. So let us now discuss what are the orientation relationships and decide whether we can assume the interfaces, the 2O-1 interfaces, to be called twins, or whether they are rather kwinks, as the similarity between the layered medium and the unity martensite would suggest. So let us introduce some notation. We will have some reference configuration, which will be our identity, and then we will have two differently oriented lattices of martensite, let they be A and B, and we have some lattices in these regions. While the blue lattice is the identity, and then we are having the red and the green lattice, and the blue and red lattice are 2O-1 twin related, and the 100 twin relation is between the green and the blue lattice. But there is one more interface here between the green and the red lattice. So let's see what is the orientation relationship over this interface. And we can observe that it is just a simple rotation, which means that this interface cannot be a twin. Instead, it must be a dislocation pi, as we observe in layered media forming kinks. So this turns us the idea that even the other interfaces, those between the red and blue lattices, can be interpreted differently. In fact, when we decompose the 2O-1 twin relation, we realize that this is completely equivalent to having a rotation plus a 100 twin relation. Surprisingly, this is exactly the same shape strain, exactly the same relation between the two lattices. So just based on the orientation relationship analysis, we cannot tell whether the interfaces are twins or they're kwinks, but there are some indications that maybe the kwinking is more probable here, because let us now see how one can get these interfaces. For the twinning path is pretty complicated. I do not have time to spend here on the details, but the 2O-1 twin is twinning so-called beyond the Erickson-Petrie neighborhood, which means you are not transforming one unit cell into another, but you need to combine several unit cells of the parent orientation to form a twin. So it's somehow sketched here. You need some quite large shear of this newly composed cell, and then you need a massive shuffle. And somehow, as shown in this paper by Hussein Sahitoglu and his co-workers, and in some other papers, this twinning path seems to be quite energetically expensive, while for the kwink, we are just using two relatively energetically cheap mechanisms, which are 100 twinning plus the 10001 plastic slip in martensite, which are both commonly observed in B19 prime martensite. So we are having two deformation mechanisms of the B19 prime crystal lattice, and one of them seems to be energetically more expensive, and that one is the 2O-1 twinning, which somehow indicates that maybe our suspicion that these interfaces are not twins but something different may not be wrong. And also there are some like high resolution PM observations in this paper from 2003, which show that the 2O-1 twin interfaces is far from being crystallographically sharp as one could expect from the compound twin. And when we compare it to a type 2 twin, which should be more complex, we realize that in fact the type 2 twin in nickel titanium is much sharper and simpler. So let's move to the continuum mechanics analysis. Well, it's again a bit more complicated than for classical twinning, but in fact one can simply write down the compatibility equations that ensure that this microstructure can exist without some really excessive elastic strains, and these equations are in here. And the first three of them, which are just the kinematic compatibility equations over the individual interfaces, are satisfied, but the last one, which requires the two shearing vectors along these interfaces to be parallel to each other, is not satisfied, and it is not even approximately satisfied, which in fact means that such a microstructure can never arise just from twinning. So it drives the possibility that this is just a classical twinning pattern completely out. And when we look into the works of Tomonari Inamura on kinking, realize that this is something very typical for similar ridge-like patterns in layered media. And the explanation I learned from Tomonari's papers is that there must be kind of plastically slip region here around the tip of the microstructure. Of course, the microscopy cannot see the slipped region because it's just the dislocation passed through these regions. And if we somehow admitted that there is such plastically slipped region, we can easily understand how the microstructure arises and how the so-called kwinking mechanics works. Well, you cannot see the reference to Tomonari's paper because it is right behind me, but on the next slide you will see all the references together. So simply speaking, when I'm having a grain like this and I am pulling it, but the material has just one slip system, and that is the case for B19 martensite, because there's just this slip system in B19 martensite, then the material wants somehow to utilize this one available slip system for elongation along the loading. And what it does is slipping some dislocations in this way, here forming the twin, and in this region, the material forms a combination of twinning and plastic slip. So this is how these microstructures are formed. And in fact, this is how the B19 martensite utilizes the slip. So now to some conclusions. In fact, the orientation relationships cannot tell us whether the 2O-1 interfaces are twins or kwinks. They bring the same lattice invariant strains. On the other hand, well, there are some indications that kwinking might be less energetically expensive. And then we use continuum mechanics to analyze the compatibility in these microstructures. And we learned that there must be a slip, plastic slip active, and otherwise the compatibility cannot be achieved. So in fact, the observed patterns arise simply due to the plastic slip. They are consequences of the only one plastic slip in the B19 martensite, and they are in fact kinks utilizing the twinning, so we can call them kwinks. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. Here are some references related to this presentation, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you for watching.